McFarlane.
Yes.
Mr. Houston.
Yes.
Mr. Porter. Mr. Harrison.
Yes.
Mr. Lohr.
Yes. Those in favor of the motion, 16. Those opposed, 30.
The motion is defeated. The honourable member for Pictou East.
We're going to continue debate on Bill 6?
No, we're moving on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 11:02. We'll conclude at 11:52. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Premier. Yesterday, during question period, the Minister of Health admitted that his bill was flawed. The bill has a few flaws, as exactly as quote from Hansard is what he said, which is a blinding glance into the obvious now, Mr. Speaker. 3,600 teenage Nova Scotians certainly will feel the effects of this flawed bill. How the government messed up something that seems so obviously right is beyond me, Mr. Speaker, but in any event, I would like to ask the Deputy Premier, does she agree with the Minister of Health that his bill is now flawed?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, when this bill passes, youth that the member opposite are talking about will no longer be able to buy e-cigarettes. They'll be treated like tobacco. Smoking will be restricted of the vapor products. It will be a much better situation.
The Honourable Leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when this bill passes, gutted as it is by the government's own amendments, teenage Nova Scotians will be able to have cherry-flavoured tobacco, peach-flavoured tobacco, lipstick-flavoured tobacco. Mr. Speaker, they had a chance to actually stop that, and we agreed with them that that should be stopped, and yet they took those provisions out, Mr. Speaker. That's why it's a flawed bill. The Minister of Health even admitted it. And all of that.
Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the official opposition has the floor.
All of that can be fixed right now, Mr. Speaker, if we continue to agree that cherry and peach and lipstick and all those other flavoured tobaccos can be stopped, then, Mr. Speaker, we should do that. So I'll ask...
Order, please. I'll ask the Honourable Leader of the official opposition to proceed with this question.
Fine, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying. Why is this government going to rush a flawed bill through when there's such an obvious fix to it that we can do right now in this session?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite again is speaking about the sale of tobacco, which is currently illegal to everybody under the age of 19. That continues, and so does the sale of e-cigarettes and the treatment of e-cigarettes as a tobacco product. And so where you can smoke it will be restricted. It's important to get this bill passed and move forward on this. And even Dr. Strang, Mr. Speaker, had said that we can do better in the bill in the future.
The Honourable Leader of the official opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker,
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the official opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, our whole point is now is the time to do better. The government of old tomorrow always wants to put it off till another day. Well, 3,600 teenage Nova Scotians are going to start with cherry-flavoured and peach-flavoured. We know this, Mr. Speaker. It's a matter of science, Mr. Speaker, but that seems to be okay to let that happen for the government. I can't believe it's true. They can quote whoever they want. Community health boards, Doctors Nova Scotia, Smokes Free Nova Scotia, they all want a ban on flavoured tobacco now, Mr. Speaker. Will the Deputy Premier, on behalf of the government, apologize to all these groups that want to see a ban on tobacco flavours that are obviously targeted at teenage Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's very clear that by holding some parts of this bill separate, it shows that we are going to consult with Nova Scotians. All the people that the member opposite was speaking about will be... The bill moves, Mr. Speaker, consultation and listening to Nova Scotians is the right thing to do. And as I said, during law amendments, the Conservative members were very big on the fact that we needed more consultation. Now it will be happening.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question for you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, in August of this year, the Minister of Health was on a radio station in Bridgewater, and I'm going to quote what he had to say. I'm very concerned about the youth of our province, that you can see the e-cigarette as an entry into an addiction of nicotine. And you know, nicotine, it's very, very difficult once you're addicted to break the addiction. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is this. Will the Minister of Health explain the logic of cracking down on non-tobacco products while he's turning a blind eye to products he himself has admitted to be very, very difficult to quit once you become addicted?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, perhaps it's time to enlighten the House and Nova Scotians as to what the other two parties failed to do. Tabling a piece of Hansard which has the NDP posing the following question to the Conservatives. I'll table a letter obtained through Freedom of Information in which the Minister of Health, Promotion and Protection indicates that he does endorse a ban. The federal government indicates it also endorses the ban. If everyone agrees it's such a great idea, why don't the Minister of Health Promotion ban it himself? That exchange, Mr. Speaker, was in 2008. Both parties on the other side were aware, knew this was an issue. They both did nothing. This government will have a ban on flavored tobacco.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on her first supplementary.
Speaker, nobody is fooled by the pathetic attempts of the Minister of Health to deflect from the failure of his flawed legislation, Mr. Speaker. Back in December 13th, in the New Glasgow News, this minister told the public of Nova Scotia that e-cigarettes should be treated like tobacco. Well, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is, when is he going to start treating tobacco like tobacco?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite, former Minister of Health. I did a scan. I took a look at the strategy they brought forward in 2011. It doesn't mention e-cigarettes. It doesn't mention flavored tobacco. In fact, even worse, Mr. Speaker, these two ministers never raised flavored tobacco in 4.5 years. In 4.5 years. In 4.5 years. In 4.5 years, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. If we pay attention to the timeline, there will be plenty of time for about 20 more questions, one at a time. The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party with her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I have a news flash for the Minister of Health. He is now the person who is responsible for the health and well-being of people in this province, Mr. Speaker. And to go back to 2008 is just a cop-out, Mr. Speaker, and everybody here knows that. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know that the Minister of Health has some pretty interesting views on the healthcare system in Nova Scotia. He shared those with us in the Advertiser from Kings County back in shortly after he became Minister of Health. And in that article, he chastised those who don't take the advice of their doctors, their nurses, and their nutritionists to take more responsibility for wellness and their own health. And so my question to the Minister of Health is, why doesn't he take his own advice and start taking advice from the doctors and the nurses and the healthcare experts and providers in this province and ban flavored tobacco now, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the former Minister for reminding me and all Nova Scotians of how committed I am to the wellness of Nova Scotians. The member opposite knows very well that as hard as we have taken the line on e-cigarettes, which is the best in Canada, by the way, that won't happen until May 31st of next year. And by May 31st of next year, our legislation will also include a ban on flavored tobacco. To finish, Mr. Speaker, the third party has taken this as their flavour of the day.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a lively Friday morning here in the House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Deputy Premier. We now know that a dangerous offender has escaped from the Nova Scotia Correctional Facility in Dartmouth. Mr. Speaker, this is at least the fifth escape in the last few years. On a previous occasion, the Liberal Justice critic, now the Minister of Economic Development, said, and I quote, "This most recent incident does nothing to inspire confidence that the system has improved," and went on to say, and I quote, "There are security protocols that need to be reconsidered at this point, and one would think the government would undertake whatever measures are at its disposal." So my question to the Deputy Premier is, what security protocols have been improved in the last year to prevent this from happening under the Liberal government's watch?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this is certainly a good question from the Minister or the member opposite, and I'd like the Minister of Justice.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for this very important and serious question today, and I really hope that everybody in the House is listening, and I hope that, because this is televised, the public is all listening. I'm angry and I'm appalled that an offender has been released in error from our correctional facility. Something this severe should never be allowed to happen. The important thing right now is for people to understand that this has happened. A press release has just been issued with the photo and information about the offender. We need to make sure the word gets out and police are investigating. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister of Justice for that answer. And it's important that those things be clear. But, Mr. Speaker, my question was this. The Liberal Justice critic last time around said it's important at that point that security protocols be improved. All Nova Scotians are going to want to know how this happened under that minister's watch. I'm going to ask her what improvements in the security protocols have been made under her watch to prevent this thing from happening in the first place.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You can rest assured that we will find out how this happened. An internal investigation at the moment is occurring. The important thing that I want people to keep in mind, though, is the priority here is to ensure that this offender is caught, that we make sure our children and our parents are all safe, and that they are all aware that this has happened. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My new question is for the Deputy Premier. We now know, Mr. Speaker, this week that the call for bids on offshore exploration development has come up with a big zero. That's despite the fact that only 2 years ago we had bids totaling $2 billion for the right to explore and develop our offshore resources. Clearly, the close for business sign that the government has put up across our whole province with their ban on onshore gas is costing Nova Scotians in offshore opportunities now, Mr. Speaker. Will the Deputy Premier admit the obvious, that their policy of banning onshore development is now hurting our offshore as well?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess, obviously I'm disappointed that there were no bids, and as he would be aware, companies have indicated it's because they felt that it was a gas play and there are already 15 STLs available. It's interesting to me that he thinks that we're closed for business since Bear Head Friday announced they were doubling production and the size of their project. Yesterday they announced that they're actually adding another 30% to their application of the size of their project, and Deep Panuke just the other day did a $450 million capital raise for projects here in Nova Scotia. And just this past week, we had energy investors from around the world talking about what a great place Nova Scotia is to invest in energy.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister can't have it both ways. He's either disappointed or he's thrilled with what's going on. I don't know which it is. He said both. Fact of the matter is, warm words aside, the bids were $0. Mr. Speaker. That is the problem. When he was an opposition critic, he had a lot to say about this very scenario. Mr. Speaker, he said, and I quote, in this House, when we had a previous bid of $0 under the NDP, what is your department doing, either independently or in cooperation with the board, to try and ensure that the parcels that are nominated are actually parcels that the industry is interested in bidding on? In other words, he wanted the NDP to do their job and make sure these bids attracted real dollars. Did he do his job? And if so, why did he fail so badly in this case?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a good question. And in fact, these parcels were established for bid before we were in government. So the first bid the first ones. No, Mr. Speaker, this is an important question. It's a very important question because exactly what I asked the previous government to do is a process that we actually already began for the first call for bids that were involved in establishing the parcels for, and the nomination for those parcels closes on December 1st of this year. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm doing exactly what I called on the NDP to do previously. I am disappointed that there were 0 bids on this, absolutely, like all Nova Scotians would. But, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely not closed for business, and the recent investments in our offshore and onshore petroleum in just the past few days alone prove that.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Justice. As we heard in the previous question about a dangerous offender is now on the loose, Mr. Speaker, and there's plenty of time in the future if we're going to talk about blame. But today is about the security of our citizens. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask through you to the Minister what protocols are in place now to protect the citizens while this individual is on the loose.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the very good question that he's asking. A press release has been issued with a photo of the offender that has gone out to all media outlets. The police is actively searching for the offender. We're seeking the help of all media to ensure that the word gets out, and the fact that we're televised now, hopefully, that will also increase awareness out there. And perhaps you can all let your MLA constituency offices know the release has a photo of the offender right in it. Thank you.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
I want to thank the Minister for her answer, and through you again, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, can you advise the House what the investigation will look like vis-a-vis to find out why this incident happened? Can you explain how that will unfold?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There is an ongoing internal investigation right now at the Correctional Facility Centre. This just only happened not about an hour ago, maybe, if that. So that is ongoing. I don't have any specific information on that, but rest assured, you all here, as well as the media, will all be informed as to how this could have possibly have happened. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And through you, my question will be to the Minister of Community Services. As the Minister is well aware, and her government, and all of us for that matter, there was a $52 million investment announced a week or so ago to help those most in need, really, when we think about that. And I would like to ask the Minister, will that money be spent on constructing new facilities to help accommodate some of these situations that exist through individuals, families, and others looking for affordable housing, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. Ever since coming into office as Minister of Community Services and Housing Nova Scotia, we've been quite proactive in establishing new and exciting partnerships with municipal governments, private sector, nonprofit. So there are new builds going up all over Nova Scotia from one end of the province to the other in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, different municipalities. The private sector has come to the table and actually engaged government in looking at housing. We currently house over 18,000 people in the province of Nova Scotia, and I'm quite excited about the new builds, including the big one in HRM, which will be Bloomfield, which is absolutely on time and on track for opening in 2017.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. I would just further to that ask, I know that we haven't anything, as far as I know, slated for the area of Hants West that I represent, and the numbers actually are quite staggering, how many there are waiting for affordable housing, unfortunately. Is part of this $52 million investment also inclusive of rental supplements, I guess is the term that's used nowadays, for those on low income?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Absolutely. In fact, $9.4 million of the $52 million that was announced last week will go directly to rent supplements. And what that will do will move approximately 500 people, or 1/4 of the wait list, off the wait list for affordable housing. So people who are low income or on income assistance who currently receive the shelter rate will have their rent supplemented. And that will be rolled out by December 1st. So that is the fastest, most effective way to move people off of a wait list and get them into safe housing. And that will be ongoing over the next couple of months, but we'll be starting December 1st.
The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Deputy Premier. Last week, Elections Nova Scotia's 2013-14 annual report was tabled in this House. In that report, the Chief Electoral Officer made recommendations to the House of Assembly regarding new legislative changes. Chief among them is a call for fixed date elections. Does the government intend to accept the chief recommendation of the Chief Electoral Officer and bring in legislation to establish fixed date elections?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and that is a very topical question for all of us and one that we're very interested in. What I can assure the member opposite is we'll be looking at all of the recommendations in that report.
The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Nova Scotia is the last province in Canada to adopt these fixed election dates. Last December, the Minister of Finance said in this House that fixing an election date would modernize Nova Scotia's approach to elections. That's hence heard December the 4th. The Liberal Party, while in opposition, introduced a bill to fix election dates. Establishing fixed election dates is the chief recommendation of Elections Nova Scotia. So why is the government not accepting this recommendation?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's very clear that the member opposite is incorrect in saying that we're not looking at it. We are looking at all of the recommendations and certainly taking them under advisement, because we have a great deal of respect, as all members do, for Elections Nova Scotia and the very important role they play in ensuring we have an up-to-date democracy. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question for you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, yesterday during question period, the Minister of Health was asked about a family who's unable to get home care services through the VON for their mother because home care has been frozen by the VON for several months. And in responding to the question, the minister said, and I quote, "We're moving to what will be a competitive model to provide home care, which we think will bring better results." So, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Health please explain what he meant when he made reference to a competitive model?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite knows, that we are currently doing a refresh of the continuing care strategy, which came into effect in 2006, and I'm sure that she'll be anticipating those changes and results probably by spring.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when a person leaves a hospital but still requires medical care that only a nurse can provide, they get home care services through the VON across this province. The Victorian Order of Nurses, a very respected organization, is a not-for-profit healthcare model of delivery. Mr. Speaker, nurses in rural Nova Scotia are concerned that a more competitive model may be code for privatizing healthcare, bringing in private for-profit providers into the system. So my question to the Minister of Health is this: will he please explain whether his plans for continuing care include allowing for-profit health care to provide nursing or other services throughout our health care system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We know what a great service VON provides, both in terms of nursing and in home support. We know that VON has a place, a future in any of our plans here in Nova Scotia. In terms of gaining the greatest efficiencies, we know that probably the home support area, there can be some change, in fact, that will improve the system.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the College of Dental Hygienists called on the provincial government to create an oral health strategy to help promote oral health care. They're not alone in that call. The Nova Scotia Dental Association has been calling on the government of the day for action for a few years. Both represent a group of people who are experts in their fields, and by encouraging first tooth, first visit practice and allowing dental hygienists to operate and deliver services in community clinics, we could prevent hundreds of costly and unnecessary surgeries children undergo each year. So my question to the Minister is, has the Minister spoken with representatives of these two groups, and has he adopted their call for action?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the former Minister of Health raises a great question today. We know that, unfortunately, during the time of the NDP party time in office with dental care, they pushed to get dental care over a wider part of our youth population. If they had actually consulted, there would have been greater direction towards the very area that the dental hygienists are now identifying, have provided a great report to Nova Scotia. When the House adjourns, whenever, then I will be meeting with that group. I think they're making some excellent points that can improve dental care in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
When the House adjourns, indeed. Chronic cavities can lead to the early childhood caries, which is ECC, which may result in painful surgery for children. And this is, Mr. Speaker, entirely preventable. Together, both organizations have concrete and relatively straightforward requests from the government to help better with the oral health of young children. These hospitals' stays are preventable, painful, and costly to both the parents and to the children. It is time Nova Scotians receive more education and services to meet oral health care needs. When can Nova Scotians expect movement from this government on the recommendations made by the Nova Scotia Dental Association and the College of Dental Hygienists?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a very, very important question. It's one that we had to make one of those, difficult decisions at a time of fiscal restraint. We had to provide the IWK with another child dental surgeon, an anesthesiologist to support the program, especially when a lot of that serious work can be prevented by interventions early on. I have met with the Dental Association. I will meet with the hygienists after the House adjourns, and I think both are going to have a very significant input into the direction that we need to take to make sure that the early years get the most attention.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education. Mr. Speaker, I know we're all troubled here to hear allegations of sexual harassment in the workplace, and there have been many such allegations in the news this fall. And while the workplace settings are very varied, one similarity among all of these reports is the uncertainty about what actions an employer can and should take. So my question, Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Labour, is will she commit to reviewing the provincial guidelines for dealing with sexual harassment in the workplace and report her findings to this House?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. We were, in fact, all quite shocked to hear about a number of different allegations in the workplace. I would like to let Nova Scotians know that if they do feel that they are being not treated properly in their workplace, they can contact our Labour Standards line, and we'll walk them through what the situation is, Mr. Speaker. And if, in some cases, there will be a necessity to go through that process, other situations, Mr. Speaker, would be more properly be handled by the Human Rights Commission. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much, and I thank the Minister for her question. Mr. Speaker, workplaces in our province are very diverse, and so too is their corporate culture. For example, a manufacturing facility is different from a hospital, and our legislature, for example, operates differently than a retail store. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister is, will she commit to ensuring that provincial guidelines for dealing with sexual harassment in the workplace take the diversity of our work settings, including our legislature, into account, and ensuring that they apply to everyone and that everyone is aware of what these guidelines contain?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If anyone has any questions, I would urge them to call the Labour Standards branch. The number is 1-888-315-0110. So if anyone, whether they're an employer or an employee, has concerns, they can contact that number, and we can walk them through what the standards are. And I'll send that number over to the minister, the former minister, afterwards. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of the Public Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we heard the Minister speak about a number of initiatives the Public Service Commission is planning to implement. They plan to attract young people to the civil service while instituting a hiring freeze and a 1% reduction in all departments. The cost of a new February holiday will impact departments a significant amount. So my question to the Minister is, how much will the holiday pay for civil servants cost Nova Scotia taxpayers?
The Honourable Minister for the Civil Service.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from across for the question. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has the least amount of holidays in Canada. And the provinces that have the most, Alberta and Saskatchewan, actually have the most booming economies in Canada. Mr. Speaker, as well, in the province of Nova Scotia, there is no hiring freeze. I don't know why the opposition keeps thinking there is one. Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, the Public Service Commission has just recently, in the last few months, hired multiple new graduates from both university and college. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, they also have fracking in Alberta, so they can afford a holiday, an extra holiday. And that wasn't my question, Mr. Speaker. My question was the cost to the taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, small businesses are worried about the impact this holiday will have on them. They know exactly where the money will come from. It's going to come from their bottom line. The government has to be honest about this as well. In September, the finance minister said departments were ordered to cut a further 1%. She said in the coming year, there have to be some serious cuts and changes. So my question again to the minister is what services or programs will be cut as a result of the February holiday expenses?
The Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Mr. Speaker, if the opposition knew the definition of fracking, they'd know we have that here too in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, there will be no services cut in the province of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, we actually delayed the February holiday 1 year to allow small businesses to adjust for it. I have spoken with many small businesses, Mr. Speaker, and they welcome the holiday. They say that it will be good. It'll be good to have a break through the long winter and to improve employee morale and to increase productivity, Mr. Speaker, something that the opposition just can't wrap their heads around.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Transportation. It has come to my attention that there are discussions beginning regarding the downsizing of winter work dispatchers who provide a great service during the winter months. Can the Minister please confirm if the Department of TIR is in fact considering cutting winter work dispatchers?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, positively not. In no way, shape or form are we cutting anything. I know what the member is referring to. We have a serious issue with communications with respect to our winter maintenance for the most part, among other things, the transportation that came out many times last year during a very difficult season. We have a dispatch and a calling system that simply isn't working for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. What we're doing, we're looking at a clear center that is 24/7, that operates professional people who take these calls, who know how to reroute traffic, who know how to make dispatch calls, who know how to reach out to those on the ground who are plowing our streets and making sure we're getting home safely, Mr. Speaker. This is a good move. It's about efficiency. There's also a $400,000 cost saving, and there will be no layoffs, no jobs impacted in any way, shape, or form.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answers. I do have a letter here that I will table because it is my understanding through this letter that 30 winter work dispatch bases will be downsized to 14 and that many as 48 positions could be affected. If this is true, can the Minister please confirm if the new central dispatch operation how many jobs it would create and actually how many job losses would be taken out of rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Mr. Speaker, we don't have dispatch depots. Dispatch is a function inside the current network of depots that we have. So this is a system that's become obsolete that we really have to create efficiency and effectiveness for the people of Nova Scotia. So there isn't any job losses whatsoever. It affects 19 FTEs, which will be entirely through attrition. There also will be 10 new employment positions there, so there's no hiring freeze in the public service right now, Mr. Speaker. We're putting people to work, and we're making sure that we're doing good things for Nova Scotians. This is a question of efficiency. In addition to the $400,000 cost savings, we're going to have a better dispatch so we can get the word out to Nova Scotians when the winter conditions hit our province. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Did he call my name? Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development. A recent story in the Chronicle Herald tells the story of 3 women who made complaints about inappropriate behavior towards them by the principal at the school where they work, and I will table that, Mr. Speaker. The women say that the principal continues to work at the school and there doesn't appear to have been any repercussions for the principal's actions. My question through you to the Minister is, what process is in place to deal with allegations of sexual harassment in Nova Scotia schools? And in light of this story, does the Minister feel this process is adequate?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. And the allegations obviously are serious. Any allegations are serious. And what's important is that there's a process in place so that those allegations can be investigated. We do have a provincial code of conduct which covers all of our staff and our students in our schools. Each board has their own code of conduct, and we also have regional education officers who are in contact constantly with the board activities. So anything that is untoward or that may need an investigation has a process that it can go through.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the minister for her answer. One of the women who made a complaint said she is disturbed as much by the school board's response as she was by the incident of harassment. So my question to the minister is, what action is the minister taking to create an environment where people in our school system have confidence their concerns about sexual harassment will be taken seriously and dealt with in an appropriate fashion?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would like to reassure all of those people working in our school environment, whether it is our teachers or our principals or our students or our volunteers or any other staff who are there, that they need to, if they feel that they have been harassed in any way, that there's a process to follow, there's a chain of command for them to go through, and if in fact they feel that they've not been satisfied with the response they get, there is also another contact for them.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Department of Community Services. The new February holiday will not only cost small business owners a significant amount of money, but it will cost taxpayers as well. This is a cost we still do not know the extent of. People providing essential services across the province will need to work that day. People's needs do not stop just because the government has legislated a holiday. So my question to the minister is, will the minister confirm that the new February holiday will not affect the level of staffing of provincial social workers, and will she estimate what the extra costs associated with this staffing will be?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I can ensure the member across the floor that the level of professionals that are in the Department of Community Services will not be affected by this holiday. And he knows as well as I do that the work that these social workers do every day, protecting the most vulnerable in Nova Scotia, is hard work, and there's a large burnout sector within that level of care, frontline care in Nova Scotia. A February holiday will be a welcome addition and has been a welcome addition based on comments from my staff about the February holiday.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, there's no one in this House is disputing the important work that social workers do. But it's also important that no one goes without services on those days. My question to the minister is, how will the minister make up the losses from her department as a result of this holiday? What services or programs may be impacted?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you. I just want to ensure the member across the floor that services in the Department of Nova Scotia don't stop because of a Saturday, a Sunday, or a holiday. There is emergency care that happens 24/7, 365 days in this department, and there will be no impact on those services so that the most vulnerable in our society will not see any interruption in service whatsoever.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's briefing notes describe that Phase 4 of the 101 highway and explains that land constraints through the town of Windsor, along with the karst topography of the area, suggests that much of the construction will be a narrow median with a barrier. My question, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister is this. Can the Minister tell this House when the final design work for Phase 4 on the 101 through the town of Windsor will be complete, and whether the narrow median barrier will be considered?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for the question. This is a conversation I've had many times with the member from Hants West about the 101, the Windsor corridor of the highway. Basically, first and foremost, with respect to the barriers, it's truly an alignment issue. We don't have the space within that area based on some of the challenges with geography to put the Jersey barrier. It's something that the member had asked for many times, and if we could do it, it was that simple, it would be done by now. So we are looking at some of the short-term measures we can do. In terms of the long-term plan for the 101, we're working towards that. My understanding is that the final design isn't done quite at this point based on those challenges with respect to the alignment, but we'll certainly work on that, and we'll get the member an update as soon as we can.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for that answer. Mr. Speaker, last December 24th, I attended the funeral of a Kings North constituent who died on this stretch of highway in a head-on collision. And with winter now rapidly approaching, can the Minister tell us if any of these short-term measures will be put in place before the onset of this winter?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
That's what we're looking at immediately, Mr. Speaker. My Deputy Minister has been in contact with a number of stakeholders in the area. Obviously, the TIR folks on the ground are looking at that, again, in conjunction with the many conversations we had here. So we'll certainly work towards that, and whatever we can get in place for the winter season along the 101 stretch, we will certainly do that. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, too, is for the Minister of TIR. Mr. Speaker, Route 203 is a vital link for residents in southwest Nova Scotia and is a serious need of repaving. Last session, the Minister said, and I quote, "We certainly have made no commitments to make that a gravel road. We will do our best to do what the people want," end quote. And I can table that. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is, can he give us an update on the status of repaving this stretch of road?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for the question. The reality is that we haven't ruled anything out officially. Based on the response from members from all sides of the House, we're doing a very organic consultation with respect to the route. And, Mr. Speaker, the reality is it's an extremely expensive project. I think the number's in the range of about 40 kilometres, and it's very, very low volume, particularly in the middle of that section. So from our own statistics and our own engineering process, it doesn't fit paving, that's without question. But we're still looking at the ways that we can somehow rehabilitate this road. We know it's important to the member. It's certainly important to the Minister of Natural Resources, and it's important to that region. So we're going to do our best, Mr. Speaker, and fix it up and make sure it's safe and passable for the residents in that area. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this road needs to be repaved and not left as just gravel, as it affects many residents. Mr. Speaker, as well, in the last session, the Minister said, and I quote, "There are a number of MLAs who are affected by this road, so we will listen, we will consult, and we will give positive feedback, and we will make our decision from there," end quote. Mr. Speaker, my final question to the Minister is, when does he plan on starting the public consultation on this particular road?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the reality is that we know we need a plan for this road. It's certainly in great decay. Again, based on the metrics that we use, that we applied, that the previous government applied when that member was in cabinet. These are the rules of the game, Mr. Speaker. This is what we apply to our processes. We don't want unsafe roads. We certainly, if we're looking at strictly process and procedure here, Mr. Speaker, that route would be a gravel road based on our metrics. But obviously, from the public's perspective, that's not acceptable at this point. So we're going to continue to have those conversations. Obviously, as we work towards our 2015 local roads plan, capital plan, we're going to have all those things into consideration. We're going to look at all the roads, and as usual, Mr. Speaker, we are going to do our very best and make sure Nova Scotians are safe. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health. In previous question period in this session, Mr. Speaker, I asked the Minister of Health if he would come to the Northside General and the Northside Cape Breton and speak with healthcare workers about the closures of the ER, closures of the lab, and the general state of the hospital in general. And the Minister committed to a meeting after this House sits. I know with the House getting close to drawing to a close, I wonder if the Minister can update me on a specific date of when he may come to the Northside General.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. you know, I don't know the exact schedule of when the House will adjourn. I thought it was going to be today. Made plans for today. I have plans to go to Cape Breton next week, looking at I think Thursday, Friday, possibly of next week. It's primarily a fact-finding mission is a big part of it. I've been in constant contact with the member for Victoria Lakes on the issues that concern her constituents, as well as the member who is from that area where the hospital is located. And I know we'll have a very important trip to the area.
The honourable member for Northside, Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the answer, Minister. The people of the North Side, Mr. Speaker, are very concerned about rumours around the closure of the North Side General and turned into a nursing home. The Minister just talked about the importance of the constituents in that area that the hospital has. And I wonder if the Minister will commit to having a public meeting and giving an update to the community on exactly where the plans are for the North Side General, the emergency room, the lab, and if it's slated to be closed or not.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much for the question. And at this stage, we have additional important meetings to those that are in Northside. We will meet with certainly the clinical stakeholders at Northside, community people for sure. But you know, I know there's a lot of concern that has risen there, not unlike some other hospitals that are about 40, 45 beds, where some changes have been made. But what I can assure the member opposite and what he can quote in the media back home is there is no plans for closing Northside Hospital.
Order, please. Time allotted for oral questions by members to ministers has expired. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that you now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself to a committee of the whole House.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, the government's already called its business for the day. We moved adjournment and they defeated the adjournment motion, so we are on government business already, as we were before question period started, and we're debating Bill number 6.
It is.
Okay. I've been provided some expert advice. And the debate on Bill number 6 was voted down, so therefore the adjournment debate was defeated. So we're